just outside the bustling limits of St. Louis, Missouri, lies a stretch of untamed forest that swallows the sunlight whole. The locals whisper about a winding path hidden deep within the woods near the Merrimack River. They call it Zombie Road, but its true name is Lawler Ford Road. It is a place where history refuses to rest quietly. Shadows stretch long across the cracked gravel, long before evening truly falls over the canopy. The silence here is heavy and unnatural. Birds do not sing, and the wind seems to hold its breath. Those who walk this forgotten path often feel the overwhelming sensation of being watched by unseen eyes lurking just beyond the dense tree line. Constructed in the late 1800s, the road was originally built to access the Merrimack River. Trains chugged along the adjacent tracks, carrying stone and gravel from the deep quarries. It was a place of backbreaking labor, where men toiled under the sweltering Missouri sun. But the river was treacherous, and the heavy machinery was completely unforgiving. Countless accidents stained the dirt of Lawler Ford Road with innocent blood. Railroad workers lost their lives to crushing wheels and sudden derailments. Their broken bodies were often left in unmarked graves near the muddy banks. The area quickly gained a grim reputation as a cursed land, where the dead outnumbered the living by a wide margin. Among the lingering spirits is the tragic figure of Della McCullough. She was the wife of a local judge who met a terrible end in 1876. Della was walking near the tracks when a fast-moving train struck her down. Her passing marked the beginning of the supernatural occurrences that would plague the dark woods. Visitors wandering the trail at dusk often report seeing a woman in a dark Victorian dress. She wanders aimlessly along the rusted remnants of the old railroad tracks. Her face is always hidden by the evening mist, but her deep sorrow radiates through the cold air. She searches eternally for a train that has long since departed. By the 1950s, the gravel path had become a popular hangout for local teenagers seeking isolation away from the watchful eyes of their strict parents. They drove their classic cars deep into the woods to share illicit drinks and scary stories. They did not realize that the frightening tales they told were actually entirely grounded in reality. It was during this era that the nickname Zombie Road was born. The moniker did not stem from the Walking Dead of cinema, but from the soulless wandering spirits spotted by terrified youths. Teenagers reported seeing translucent figures slowly dragging their feet across the dusty road. These entities appeared lost and utterly devoid of human emotion. One fateful autumn night in 1968, two young men ventured down the road in an old truck. The headlights flickered and died as they approached a notoriously sharp bend near the river. The engine sputtered into complete silence, leaving them stranded in the pitch-black wilderness. A profound chill suddenly filled the cramped cabin. Through the fogged windshield, they saw a faint blue light bobbing in the distance. It moved with a slow, deliberate pace that defied natural explanation. The glow steadily approached their disabled vehicle, illuminating the surrounding oak trees with an ethereal glow. Panic set in as the temperature inside the truck plummeted below the point of freezing. As the light drew closer, it resolved into the shape of a towering man. He wore the tattered remnants of a 19th century railroad uniform, covered in dark stains. His eyes were hollow voids that seemed to pierce through the fragile glass. The phantom raised a rusted lantern and pointed a decaying finger toward the muddy river. The terrified young men abandoned their truck and sprinted back toward civilization without looking back. They ran until their lungs burned and their legs gave out upon reaching the main highway. When police investigated the scene the following morning, the truck was found completely crushed. The heavy roof was collapsed, as if struck by a massive boulder. No rocks or fallen trees were found anywhere near the ruined vehicle. The authorities dismissed the incident as the work of rural vandals. But the local residents knew the dark truth. The spirits of the quarry workers were fiercely protective of their eternal resting place. They did not welcome arrogant intruders trespassing upon their forgotten graves. As the decades passed, the road fell into total disrepair and was eventually closed to automobile traffic. Nature slowly reclaimed the asphalt with tangled vines and thick moss. Yet the abandonment only seemed to amplify the paranormal activity. Ghost hunters and thrill seekers from across the country began to flock to the forbidden trail, seeking the supernatural. In the early 2000s, a group of paranormal investigators decided to map the haunted woods. They brought thermal cameras and high-sensitivity audio recorders to capture definitive evidence of the afterlife. Their journey began at the old Al Foster Trail entrance, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, and plunged the forest into total darkness. The lead investigator was a skeptical man named Thomas, who had spent years debunking famous ghost sightings. He walked boldly ahead of his team, while loudly challenging the spirits to show themselves. His arrogant taunts echoed off the limestone bluffs and faded into the silent canopy. The woods remained absolutely quiet, but the stillness felt incredibly menacing. Suddenly, the temperature dropped 20 degrees in a matter of seconds. Every piece of electronic equipment the team carried simultaneously shut down. The backup batteries drained to zero, leaving them entirely reliant on cheap chemical glow sticks. A thick gray fog began to roll in from the banks of the Merrimack River, obscuring the path behind them. From the dense underbrush came the distinct sound of heavy footsteps crunching on dry leaves. The rhythmic marching suggested a large group of men moving in perfect unison. Thomas held up his lantern and demanded that the intruders identify themselves. There was no vocal response, but the marching footsteps grew louder and much closer to the frightened group. A sudden gust of wind violently extinguished their remaining light source. Plunged into absolute blackness, the investigators heard the agonizing screams of unseen men echoing through the trees. The phantom cries mimicked the horrific sounds of an ancient industrial disaster. The scent of burning coal and fresh blood flooded the humid air and suffocated the terrified team. When the moonlight finally broke through the clouds, the team saw them. Hundreds of shadowy figures lined the edges of the narrow trail. These entities were completely featureless silhouettes, composed of pure darkness that absorbed the faint light. They stood shoulder to shoulder in silent judgment of the trembling humans who had foolishly invaded their sacred territory. Thomas felt a freezing grip clamp down firmly on his right shoulder. The unseen hand possessed incredible strength and forced him to his knees in the dirt. He tried to scream, but the cold air froze the breath in his lungs. The shadow people closed in around him, trapping the entire team in a tight circle of dread. A woman stepped forward from the mass of dark shapes. It was the unmistakable figure of Della McCullough, wearing her dark Victorian dress. Her face was obscured by a veil of shadows, but her presence commanded total authority over the restless dead. She raised a pale hand and pointed back toward the illuminated safety of the distant highway. The message was entirely clear and undeniable. The living were no longer welcome in this forsaken place. The grip on Thomas released instantly, and the marching sounds abruptly faded into nothingness. The massive army of shadow people simply dissolved into the rolling river fog. The investigators wasted no time and fled the cursed forest in complete panic. Modern daytime hikers often find the paved path quite serene and beautiful. They admire the lush greenery and the peaceful flow of the adjacent waters. However, the park rangers strictly enforce a curfew that clears the trail long before nightfall. Those caught trespassing after dark face heavy fines and the very real danger of encountering the supernatural. Even during the brightest daylight hours, some visitors report deeply unsettling experiences. Hikers claim to hear their names softly whispered from the deep woods. When they turn to look, there is never anyone standing there. Some discover mysterious bruising on their arms or legs after returning to their parked cars without any memory of suffering an injury. One local historian spent months researching the tragic history of the surrounding region. He discovered records of a forgotten orphanage that once stood near the bluffs. Diseases swept through the overcrowded facility during the early 20th century, claiming the lives of many young children. Their small, unmarked graves were completely lost to the relentless overgrowth of nature. This horrifying discovery explained the numerous reports of phantom children playing in the woods. Visitors often find small handprints on the dusty windows of their vehicles after parking near the trail entrance. Some hear the faint echoes of children laughing or singing nursery rhymes in the distance. The innocent voices sound twisted and corrupted by decades of isolation. A brave documentary crew once attempted to film a special segment deep within the woods. They set up their heavy cameras along the most active stretch of the ruined path. For the first few hours, the forest remained perfectly quiet and entirely unremarkable. Then the audio technician noticed a strange anomaly buzzing through his expensive monitoring headphones. He isolated the audio track and amplified the mysterious frequency. Beneath the natural ambient sounds of the flowing river, he heard distinct human voices. The voices were pleading for help and begging for mercy in a language that sounded strangely archaic. The terrifying whispers overlapped and multiplied until they formed a deafening chorus of pure spiritual agony. The camera operator noticed a massive dark anomaly appearing on his monitor. The screen displayed a huge towering mass of shadows, blocking the entire width of the path. When he looked away from the monitor to view the scene with his own eyes, there was nothing but empty air. The camera could see what the human eye could not. The shadowy mass on the screen began to rapidly accelerate toward the filming crew. The temperature plummeted so quickly that frost immediately formed on the metallic camera lenses. The audio technician threw off his headphones as the recorded screams reached an unbearable volume. The heavy equipment suddenly tipped over and crashed onto the unforgiving gravel path. The terrified crew scrambled to gather their broken gear and escape the oppressive darkness. As they ran, they felt unseen hands violently pulling at their thick jackets and heavy backpacks. One producer stumbled and fell hard against a jagged limestone rock. He claimed that a freezing pair of hands physically pushed him into the dangerous roadside ditch. They managed to reach their van, but the terrifying ordeal was not over. As the driver turned the ignition key, a pale face pressed against the passenger side window. It was the face of a young boy with hollow eyes and decaying skin. He silently screamed into the glass before vanishing into the swirling nocturnal fog. Incidents like these cement the reputation of Zombie Road as a highly dangerous location. The spiritual energy here is incredibly aggressive and territorial. It is not a place for casual thrills or amateur ghost hunting expeditions. The entities that dwell within the dark woods actively resent the intrusion of the living into their eternal domain of suffering. Many prominent psychics have visited the trail to attempt communication with the restless dead. Almost all of them have reported an overwhelming feeling of profound sadness and intense anger. The land itself seems completely saturated with the negative emotions of those who perished violently. The heavy spiritual pollution makes it incredibly difficult for the dead to move on. One gifted medium attempted to perform a cleansing ritual near the old railroad tracks. She brought sage and holy water to bless the forgotten graves of the quarry workers. As soon as she struck a match to light the bundle of sage, a massive windstorm erupted. The fierce gale was entirely localized to her immediate standing area. The medium heard a booming voice echo directly inside her own mind. The entity commanded her to leave the dead to their eternal rest. It warned her that the spirits here belonged to the deep earth and could never be cleansed by mortal hands. The psychic fled the forest and publicly vowed never to return to that place. Today, the famous trail has been partially paved over and rebranded as a nature path. The local government hopes that bringing daylight activities to the area will dispel the dark rumors. They installed modern benches and informative historical plaques along the scenic route. Bicycles and happy families now pass through the same woods where tragic deaths occurred. But the cosmetic updates have done absolutely nothing to calm the restless spirits. The concrete path simply covers the blood-soaked dirt that holds centuries of immense suffering. When the sun goes down and the park empties, the true masters of the forest reclaim their territory. The heavy silence returns, and the shadow people begin their nightly patrol. Thrill seekers still attempt to sneak into the park by walking through the dense river brush. They bypass the locked gates and ignore the multiple warning signs posted by the authorities. These foolish trespassers often find themselves entirely disoriented in woods they thought they knew perfectly well. The trail seems to supernaturally twist and change direction at night. A teenager named Michael decided to test his courage by walking the path alone at midnight. He brought only a small flashlight and a profound sense of foolish confidence. The first mile was completely uneventful, and he laughed at the silly local legends. Then his flashlight beam illuminated a massive dark figure standing completely still ahead. The figure was entirely black and completely absorbed the light from the powerful beam. It stood at least 8 feet tall, with disproportionately long arms hanging by its sides. Michael froze in absolute terror as the massive entity slowly turned its featureless head toward him. A foul stench of rotting vegetation and stagnant water washed over him. The giant shadow took a single step forward and covered an impossible amount of distance. Michael dropped his flashlight and bolted back the way he had just come. The sound of heavy thudding footsteps pursued him relentlessly through the pitch-black forest. He felt the cold breath of the entity on the back of his exposed neck. He burst out of the tree line and collapsed onto the wet grass near the main road. The pursuing footsteps immediately ceased at the exact border of the park property. Michael looked back into the dark woods and saw multiple glowing red eyes watching him from the tree line. The malevolent spirits were silently guarding their hidden domain. The local police found him shaking uncontrollably and rambling about massive shadow monsters. They issued him a heavy citation for trespassing and sent him home to his terrified parents. Michael never set foot near the dark woods again and refused to speak about his harrowing experience for many years. The psychological scars left by the encounter never healed. The legend of Zombie Road continues to grow with each passing generation of Missouri residents. The terrifying tales are passed down from older siblings to younger friends around campfires. The internet has only amplified the notoriety of the haunted trail, drawing curious visitors from far away. They come seeking a brief thrill, but often leave with lasting trauma. What makes this particular location so uniquely terrifying is the sheer volume of spiritual activity. It is not just one lonely ghost haunting an old abandoned house. It is an entire concentrated ecosystem of the undead trapped in a small corridor of ancient woods. The tragic history has created a permanent tear in the fabric of reality itself. The restless spirits of the abused quarry workers continue to seek revenge against the living. The sorrowful ghost of Della McCullough forever searches the foggy tracks for a train that will never arrive. The phantom children of the forgotten orphanage play eternally in the dark underbrush. They are all permanently bound to the cursed soil of the riverbank. If you ever find yourself driving through the quiet suburbs of St. Louis at night, beware. You might see a dark wall of trees looming ominously in the distance near the river. Do not be tempted to pull over and explore the hidden pathways that lie beyond the modern pavement. Some mysteries are better left completely unsolved and undisturbed. The shadow people of Lawler Ford Road are always patiently waiting for their next careless victim. They lurk just out of sight behind the limestone bluffs and the thick oak trees. The woods belong to the dead, and they will defend their territory with terrifying ferocity. Once you enter the dark path, a piece of your soul remains forever.